when I feel defensiveness coming up now, my practice is to take a breath and say, what is there in this moment for me to learn? How can I get curious, right? How can I understand the nuance in their story?
Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more month than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident.
Good day, and welcome to Give a Heck. On today's show, I welcome Shana Francesca. Shana is a speaker, writer, and entrepreneur, and has been interviewed and been published in Medium, Authority Magazine, and Shout Out LA, and Emotional Intelligence Plus magazine. Shana helps people live more joyful and connected lives through principles of life design. Shana believes our present and future are transformed when we infuse our lives with intention. We design our lives and realize the power in accepting ourselves as the author of our story. I'd like to welcome you to the show, Shana. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and share with us some of your life journey.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's like we were talking about before I hit record. The appreciation for me goes both ways, right? I
Yeah.
really appreciate you investing your time and agreeing to, bring some of your knowledge, some of your, just who you are and
Yeah.
sharing your energy and your story. I know it's going to resonate with the listeners and people watching. Just after putting more research in, like I mentioned to you yesterday, just to find out really, what makes Shana tick and what ticks Shana off. Right. So, and some of that's great though. That's
Yeah.
who you are. That makes you
Yeah.
your unique self. So your unique self, I'd appreciate if you could do me the favor and share your origin story from the littlest moments that you can remember, the earliest recollections from little Shana to where you are today.
Yeah. So first I want to tell, everyone who's listening, trigger warning. My story is one that involves abuse and sexual assault. And so if those things are sensitive subjects for you that might be triggering for you, please proceed with caution, or perhaps don't listen to this episode.
Episode. Yeah, I
It
appreciate
might,
that.
it might make you feel unsafe. My earliest memory is of sexual assault. I was raped at the age of 3 by my babysitter's son. I was born into an abusive household. And the thing that you learn very quickly as a child is that if your parents are unhealthy people, the people they surround themselves with are also unhealthy, right? And so you quickly realize that you are not safe inside of your own life and with your own parents, nor with the people they surround themselves with. So there's not a single space of safety for you. And home becomes a war zone when you're in an abusive household. So there's no safety there either. And I'm neurodivergent. I was diagnosed with ADHD at 5, and I came to realize in the last year that I'm also autistic. And so being neurodivergent in a world that was already overwhelming for me, and then in an abusive environment and suffering suffering abuse and sexual assault, my whole life felt like it was nothing but pain. And there were times where I started to kind of realize, if I want to experience this life in anything other than the context of pain, I'm going to have to make it for myself. And so I started really living inside of my imagination, like total Anne of Green Gables style, like, talk to yourself in the mirror, because I was the only safe person. that I knew. And so just kind of started to really live in my imagination and to recognize that, like, if I closed my eyes or I took a walk in the woods or I closed my bedroom door and I could just imagine a space or a place in this world and live in that world of creating a place where I was seen and heard and understood and valued, right? And and that started kind of morphing into me creating my bedroom as this place of safety, of putting different images up on the wall, writing down quotes on index cards, which I still do to this day. I still write things on index cards and post them all over the wall, to remind myself different things. You know, when moments would happen and I was broken down by a person or a moment or an energy, that I could read those quotes and remember that other people in this world have at any time felt the same way, and maybe they found their way out too, right? And so my bedroom walls became like a vision board for my life. I didn't have that language back then, right? But I can look back and say it was kind of a vision board, right? What we would call that now. And as I grew up, things got more and more violent. My parents joined the evangelical Christian church, and then they started joining ever more conservative and ever more strict, and ever more religiously abusive versions of the evangelical Christian church, until we ended up at one that I spent, most of my adolescent into adulthood, which I now can look back and recognize it was really a cult. I'm laughing, but it's not funny.
That's
And
okay though, right?
yeah, yeah,
That's that's the way nervous energy escapes our body, right?
exactly,
For those
exactly. Yeah,
listening, it's not the fact that she thinks it's funny. It's just
yeah,
I do the same thing.
yeah, exactly. Sometimes we just got to let it out in whatever way it's meant to come out.
Exactly.
Um, and so through that process, I now again can look back and recognize that my father was actually grooming me. I was forced to take a chastity pledge, a virginity pledge at the age of 12 in front of our, you know, 2,000, 2,500 person church. I didn't want to. I wanted to, if I was going to be required to take this pledge, I wanted to do it privately. I wasn't allowed. And it was really a declaration of, on my father's part, that I was owned by him. And the reason is because 3 years later, my father sexually assaulted me. He tried to have sex with me when I was 15. And so there was trauma after trauma building on top of each other. And so when I say my imagination really saved my life, it did, right? And my imagination began to be fostered by reading books you know, um, and just going for long walks in the woods and watching different movies like Anne of Green Gables, where I could see and feel like there's other weird people who've been through really terrible things, and there's good people in this world that, like Anne of Green Gables was kind of rescued by this older couple, and so I would look for the older couple in my life, right? I would look for the people in my life who could see my pain and who would reach out a hand and would offer, love or kindness in whatever way that they could. And by focusing on those things, I was able to start to kind of see that there is good in this world, right? And that I could be a part of making sure other people were safe, right? I could become that person for other people, by becoming that person for myself too. And so that really was kind of the foundation of like creating safe space for not only myself, but for other people, became the foundation of me deciding to go and become an interior designer. And that's what I went to school for. That's what my degree is in. I have a BS in interior design. Um, but through that, and then on top of my interior design work, I started to recognize that all of these ideas and these concepts around being intentional about our lives, being intentional about who we spend our time with, about the kinds of expectations we allow other people to put on us, and recognizing that they are most often not serving us, and all of these different concepts, and sitting down with my clients and getting clear on what is the story they want their life to tell, and how do they want to feel as they navigate through their life, and how do we create this physical environment to support you, to be the stage from which you tell the story of your life, and not in a performative way. I mean, in the way that, like, when you enter in and you watch maybe a show on Broadway or you watch something at community theater, they set the stage because it sets this tone, it sets the energy, it sets the vibe for a moment, right? And it ushers us into what's about to happen on the stage. It's the same way in our home. We can set it up so that it is supporting us and the ways in which we want to show up in our life rather than us supporting it. And as I started diving into these concepts more, it really became this thing where it's like, okay, we're actually designing our lives, and physical space becomes, interior design becomes an aspect of that work, but it's no longer, the focus is not interior design, the focus is designing our lives, right? And so that, it was kind of the birthplace of my work now as being a life designer. So it's this very clear origin of not having and understanding how the energy of a physical environment is affected by the people in it, and understanding all of how all of that interplays and works in our lives and with our mental health, and then kind of becoming the person that helps create safe space for all kinds of people, no matter what their origin story is.
Yeah, I like how I use the word association, be intentional about who you associate, because earlier on you mentioned the fact that about your parents, they
Yeah.
hung out when you're unhealthy, those listening, people that have addictions, even if it's addictions to being around people that are negative, it doesn't have to be addictions of just drugs and alcohol. You can be addicted to sadness. You will find those people that literally make you feel the same way. You are attracted to them, they're attracted to you. And I can tell you, for those that are on the journey or thinking about starting the journey to break away from an unhealthy addiction, if it is people, it'll be tough at first, but you will not have that same association of people 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years later, because in order for you to continue to climb and grow in your emotional, mental mindset, it requires you to break the addiction of stop hanging around like your parents were doing. They were hanging out with unhealthy people. And you mentioned that you need to be intentional about it. You need to
Yeah.
protect yourself and who you are as a
Yeah.
person. I know myself, I have to like what I see in me, around me, in my environment. I love how you put that. What is your stage? How do you show up?
Yeah.
What are you trying to represent? Even the
Yeah.
smallest things in my interior design of my house affect my interior of myself.
And vice versa.
Pictures, moments. Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. So,
Yeah. They're all reflections of each
yeah,
other, right?
yeah,
Like, it's nuanced and we're connected. So I think the thing, if we can take a step back and we can ask ourselves, the people we're choosing to surround ourselves with, right? In what aspect do we want our lives to look like theirs? Right? Like, they should be healthy people whose aspects of their life, maybe not every, because we're human, so not
yeah,
every
of
aspect of
course.
their life, right? They're not perfect.
Of course, of course.
But the people we surround ourselves with, there should be aspects of who they are, large aspects of who they are, that we're like, man, I would love more of this in my life, right? And they look at us and think the same, right? And so when I think we think about who we're surrounding ourselves with, if they're people who are in general unhealthy and we don't want our lives to look like them, we have to ask ourselves a couple of questions. Number one, why am I choosing to surround myself with with this person or people, right? Number two, why is it that I feel so comfortable around them? Because it's likely that I'm unwilling to address certain aspects in my own life, certain things that I'm refusing to pay attention to fix, to heal, to take accountability for in my own life. Um, and really, like, what's holding me back from perhaps finding a different or healthier community, right? Like, how can I find my way to a healthier community? Can I read some books? Can I change the places that I'm spending time in? Can I go to some different events, maybe local community, or maybe, go to an art show, go to a Friday night gallery opening? It doesn't even mean that we have to spend a ridiculous amount of money, because there's lots of free things that we can go to do, or that cost a minimal amount. But if we change the spaces we're spending time in, it can help us to change our perspective about the world. It can help us to find new community, to access new parts of ourselves, because the people we spend time with are like mirrors. they show us and help to highlight aspects of ourselves. So when we're spending time with people who the mirror they're reflecting back to us is negative things, like is only reflecting back to us the negative parts of ourselves. And I use the word negative like to mean like harmful.
Yes.
Not, I don't necessarily think that people are bad or good, but there are definitely people in this world who choose to let the harmful energy in their life be pervasive. Um, but when we're spending time with certain people, we need to ask ourselves what's reflecting back to us, right? And are is that something we want more of our life in? Because by spending time with that particular person, we are going to get more of it in our life because we're exchanging that energy with that person. Because physics tells us everything is energy, right?
Yeah.
And I like to, even if people think it sounds a little woo-woo, we all have been like in a room, right? Back to the door, back to the wall, or we've been in the middle of doing something and somebody has walked into the house or walked into a room, and we've felt their energy before we ever saw them, right? Before they even spoke a word, we have felt their energy. Maybe we got tense because we could feel that they were tense. Maybe we felt joy because we could feel the energy that radiated off of them. Joy. Maybe we were like, oh my God, I bet, something inside of us tells us that person just walked in the room and we happen to whip around and meet them right in the eyes the minute they walk in. There's so much more to our human existence than we are consciously aware of, and we feel and know each other's energy. So we have to be aware that whatever energy we're spending time around is in fact imbuing itself inside of us as well.
100%. Again, back to the associations, every little nuance in our life that we associate with, whether it's people or inanimate objects around us, affect everything. And like you said, vice versa.
Yeah.
I look at all the people in my life that have left my season of life because of choice. When I realized that they were that type of person that, as you mentioned, I love that. People are a mirror, a reflection of
Yeah.
what we believe we are, what we stand for. We may not even realize what we stand
Yes.
for. It's just an attraction to that negative energy or whatever we want to call it. So I love how you put that. You need to be very intentional, bottom line, no matter how we look at it, to live a healthy, purposeful life, to live a life on purpose, not by accident.
Yeah.
People listening, it takes effort, but guess what? It's not a lot of effort. Initially, it might hurt, it might sting, you might miss that person, or you might miss that type of movie you used to like watching, or the book, especially
Yeah.
the fiction books people read. They climb into that story and they forget that it's, and I'm not against fiction books or even drama TV shows or movies. It's, do you have the realization of that it's entertainment? Or are
Yeah.
you living within that story, and is it
Well,
pulling you in,
yeah.
and that's
Our
where you're
brains,
trapped?
yeah, that's the thing. Our brains actually experience it like we're living it when we're reading a story. And so we have to keep that in mind, right? Because our brain
Exactly.
is adapting us within the story. It's putting us in the story, even just as an observer. And so we're feeling the energy of that moment, right? And I'm
100%.
very pro fiction, actually. I'm pro reading all kinds of stories, but we do need to be sensitive to that and recognize that. And if we're watching something or reading something and we're feeling like it's stirring up some things that aren't good for us, right? Because what's good for somebody else is not necessarily good for us, right? And when we start to feel that come up, that energy start to come up, maybe we just stop reading it or move away from it, right? And give ourselves permission to exit from a situation or moment, interaction with something that isn't healthy for us, even if it's healthy for someone else, right?
I love
That's
that. That's so true. I have I don't physically read books anymore because I read so much from my own finance practice and all the planning that I do for my clients. So I listen, I'm a huge Audible fan for many years now. So I literally have more than one book going on. And for the listeners to understand what Shana is talking about better, because you did a great job of explaining it, I'll use me as an example. I'm listening to Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Well, that
mm,
anybody that's listened or that's listening or have read or listened to it themselves, that's a very emotional book. And there's sometimes I'll listen to it. It's taking me longer than normal, but I have other books that I can pop in. I have like 2, 3 Audible books going at any different time, depending on what my mindset's at. But that's realization on my part to understand my role in my development and understanding there's great messages in what Victor talks about, right? But there's also very emotional, as you did a preface to the fact of, hey, listeners, there's going to be this talked about. If this is too much for you, maybe you shouldn't listen. Well, it's the same thing with certain books. I appreciate what you said, because I literally have to check myself out. I'll feel I've also gotten very good, I don't know about yourself, of understanding and analyzing my own body triggers, little things that'll tell me I'm suffering at this moment from some anxiety, or I'm suffering from depression. I'm stuck in this past moment that I should really not worry about, because worry makes you suffer twice in life. And just things that I've learned that have made me a better coach of others. It's the same as you. You're a culmination of your origin, all your life stories, and
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing all these little nuances, these knowledge bites, so that so that others can heal, right? Or maybe
Yeah.
take that first baby step for once.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that we as human beings live in the nuance, but our world keeps asking us to categorize ourselves, right? And there's no nuance in categorization, right? And so, like, us having to constantly define ourselves in ways that just put us in a box, kind of, it strips us of our humanity. It strips us of our true ability to relate to one another, because we're just trying to we're trying to be included, we're trying to belong, rather than be ourselves and find our people, right? And
Where
I
do you
think
think
that's
that starts though? Where do you think that starts, so that we, and I know most likely the answer will be, we're always living this patterned life where we compartmentalize and we identify by labels and categories. it, do you believe, like myself, that this starts right from our earliest recollections, and that pattern teaching, and then we go into a school system that doesn't teach us how to personally develop and break out of it, and adds on to it more, especially if you're in a type of a school that is religious based. Again, I'm not here to pick on anything. I'm just letting you know that this is my observation, and they
yeah.
control you and continue to compartmentalize you to a point where you're living in a world of anxiety and depression constantly, and you're struggling, and then you're on the hamster wheel of
Or
life.
moral
And
superiority. Yeah, I mean, it
yeah,
sets up a lot of people to believe that they're morally superior, so on and so forth. Number one, I think it's because of the world we live in, especially in America, and I don't know how it is in Canada. Is like, it's a very, I mean, since 2014, a bunch of researchers at Princeton University recognized that the United States has never really been, but is no more a democracy. It is a capitalist oligarchy, and the United Nations recognizes it the same way. For that to be perpetuated, for capitalism to be perpetuated in the way that it is, it requires the industrialization of human beings. It requires human beings to give up what makes them truly unique in an effort to be easily categorized so that they can be best exploited, their labor, so on and so forth.
wow.
And so I
Thanks
think
for
that's where
sharing
it
that.
comes back to, is that we don't even realize that from the time that we're born perfect and amazing and nuanced and beautiful. And everything in our world starts to tell us that we've got to define ourselves based on specific categories that the world has accepted. If we want to be accepted, we have to shove ourselves into those categories. And it begins to strip us of our humanity from the very beginning. And the schooling system further perpetuates that, right? And the people responsible for what children get taught in school and how they're taught in school. I mean, even down to, like, in the United States, homework is like a pretty significant thing. It's a regularly accepted thing. In many countries, it's outlawed. To me, the thing that's so sinister about homework is that it violates your time, right? Because you've set aside a specific time for school. And then they're like, oh, by the way, you're going to have to do more school on your own time, right? And so it starts to demonstrate that your time isn't even your time, that it belongs in part, at least, to someone else. They get to violate that time whenever they choose. They're the authority, not you, right? And so it begins to set up this system of, we are we are not in control of our own lives. It's we must obey authority. We must do what we're told, right? And it's extraordinarily harmful. And over the long
Absolutely.
term, it just builds up and builds up, in different aspects of our life. And, in especially in religious contexts, it can become, very do as you're told.
Oh my gosh. And I think about hearing that growing up. My dad was one of 18 children. My mom was one of 9. They grew up in the Depression. They grew up with that very European attitude because they're first generation Canadian. And do as you're told, and here's the hierarchy and structure of the family. This is what we
Yeah,
do involving religion. The list
yeah,
goes on. And I know they listen to my show the odd time, so I'm not here to pick on them. It's just
yeah,
it was the times of what went on. We have to decide, do we break that chain? Do we
yeah,
continue to climb out of it? Do we move
yeah,
forward? And to answer part of one of your comments, Canada is exactly the same. You are our
yeah,
brothers and sisters. We are so much alike. I travel quite a bit in the US, and I've done
yeah,
lots of speaking engagements over the years. I have so many friends in the US,
yeah,
brothers and sisters. We are exactly the same. We have a broken school system
yeah,
based on perpetuating the same stuff year in and year out.
yeah,
Little automatons, like literally crushing our creativity,
yeah,
our and do as you're, like you said, do as I say, not as I do. And it's just
yeah,
it makes me sad, to be honest, because
yeah,
years ago I tried working within the school system. I've been encouraged by my mentors in the US, friends of mine, because they're looking at doing it in Texas themselves where they live, just reaching out again, trying again, never giving up. The fact
mhm,
that maybe the school system will wake up and say, yes, you can come in and teach
yeah,
our children
yeah.
about how to goal set, how to dream, how to live what's
They'll never let
flourishing, that little spark. I know they won't,
that
but
never let that.
I wish they would.
I wish they
That
would.
little that
They'll
little
never let that
spark,
happen.
that little
Yeah,
spark in their brain, that little
yeah,
seed where we can water it, or that fire that we could
yeah,
ignite, we
yeah.
would have such a powerful world. Because you mentioned, and I really like how you talked about the fact that we categorize in our countries wants to categorize, and there's a division, and it has nothing to do
Because
with
of that.
democracy.
Yeah,
Yes, it's
yeah.
just
It's because of the categorization that there is such an easy way for people to divide us. Well, you don't fit into this category. Well, I'm automatically suspicious, of you. Because you're not like me, right? But the reality is that there's far more that makes us alike than makes us unalike, right? And so it's far easier to divide people and to pit each other against one another when you are categorizing and overly objectifying human beings, right? Because that's ultimately what categorization is. It's objectification. And
yeah,
the minute that I can objectify you is the minute you're no longer seen as human, and the minute I can justify calling you names and making you other and oppressing you. And I can justify it because you aren't as human as I am, and you might not be human at all, right? And the minute that we slip into that kind of logic, right, which is the kind of logic that, like, the kind of logic that unfortunately America was built on, because all in the Constitution never actually meant all, which is why we have amendments to the Constitution, right?
yeah. Well, it was written, like, come on, even our Constitution, give me a break. Our forefathers, right, should have had some. It shouldn't have been just forefathers. There should have been women
All people.
involved in
Yeah,
that. It
all
should have been
people.
all people,
Yeah,
everybody interjecting.
yeah.
They had some great starting blocks, but there's a lot of massaging in that clay that needs to
Yeah.
be done.
Well, and
And
there's
it,
other, yeah, and other countries in the world. I mean, honestly, in my looking at it, other countries of the world rewrite their constitution, right?
of course, and
They
we don't
adjust,
either.
and we haven't, right? It's almost
Yeah,
held to this standard, um, like the Bible, in which people are unwilling to recognize that it was written by human beings, right?
of course.
Right? The Bible was not written by God. It was written by human beings about God, but it has gotten elevated to the status of it's God's holy word, but it's not. God didn't write it. And
No.
when we can start to understand the nuance in that and recognize that it's a reflection of the people who wrote it and a reflection of their belief systems and their desire for that moment and how they wanted people to see and perceive them, right?
Yeah.
It's very human. It's a very human thing.
Oh,
But when we
absolutely.
elevate things to godlike status, no longer is it acceptable to question them. And that's when things enter cult-like behavior, right? And so I think it's a matter of us recognizing that we should always be curious. We should always be questioning. We should always be holding things in our lives accountable and recognizing that as we change and grow and learn as human beings, that which guides us also necessarily needs to be a reflection, right? And so like right now you see in America a very much a rolling back of freedom. You know, the repeal of abortion rights in more
Roe
states,
versus Wade. Yeah.
and
So sad.
you see in multiple states around this country book banning. You see, you know, the control of education. You see very scary things happening, and when you look at how tyrants have come into play in history in the past, this is exactly how it's done, right? Is the reversal of proper education, of a diverse way of educating people, of understanding history. History is one of the very first things that's attacked because if you don't understand history, then you can easily repeat it, right? You
Oh,
can get people to
absolutely.
repeat it with you. And so when we see book banning, when we see repeal of abortion laws, usually that's done ahead of like eugenics programs. Like let's just like be real. So um in an effort to control what type of population is being created. So in the United States, the group of people who access abortion the most are religious white women. And since the white population in America has been getting smaller and smaller and is the global minority, um, you see people wanting to kind of reclaim that that status of pervasive whiteness, right? And so we have these laws being repealed where now there's no protection against child marriage. There's no protection for an 8 or 9 year old or 10-year old girl if she's or person who's impregnated being able to, you know, not have their body ravaged and destroyed by a pregnancy they didn't ask for. You also see now in states where the rapist has the right to be a part of that child's life, which means they'll be a part of that child, that the person they raped, they'll be a part of that person's life for the rest of their life as well. Like it's mayhem here. It's mayhem. And quite frankly, in one way or another, there's always been systems of oppression here. And to me, the way that we truly create a place of equity and equality is by number one, listening to each other, believing each other's lived experience, recognizing that we are more powerful together than we are separated, really starting to understand that like there are way more issues that we agree on than we disagree. And when we start to create true community, when we really start to share resources, to understand that we don't need to compete with each other, right? That if we instead work with one another, we can accomplish so many beautiful things. We start to be able to dismantle systems of oppression. The thing is, even in our own lives, right? Instead of when we go back to like talking about who we're surrounding ourselves with, if we focus on eliminating the people in our life who might be unhealthy for us to spend time with, it's really hard to make any change. If instead we start focusing on who we should or who we do want to spend our time with, the kind of people who might highlight really beautiful and positive things in our life, then we are able to spend more time with people who have a positive influence over us or a positive association for us or help to highlight beautiful things inside of ourselves, and it naturally starts to eliminate the amount of time we used to have to spend with people who are more harmful for us, right? It's the same thing when it comes to this world. If we spend time focusing on connecting with each other and creating community, we can start to share resources and we can start to provide freedom and equity for all people by focusing on enhancing the good rather than trying to, you
Get
know,
rid of the evil, the negativity.
like
Yeah.
right. I mean, yeah, we need to make sure we're calling out the bad. We need to make sure that we're but by coming together and focusing on what we can do together, we are naturally going to stop the ability of the bad from actually getting to us in the first place, right? If we're supporting each other, if we're seeing a woman walk down the street and she's being harassed by someone, we step in and we just stand with her, and we move together. Or we see someone being bullied or being attacked, and we step in and we surround that person and we stand with that person, and then we're moving together in this world, protecting one another and sharing resources. The bad can't do what it wants to do if we're standing together against it.
Absolutely. You mentioned about some different points. One of the first one being number one was listening. I think that's one of the weakest links in our society today. Is people don't listen to one another to understand. They listen to talk.
To argue.
They don't truly, they aren't truly present. And that's something that I have to work on all the time. And I will till the day I take my last breath. Is to be present when Shana's talking. Am I listening? Yes, I need to also have a portion of my brain going, okay, that's why I take notes, so that I can still be present. Okay, now I can look down. Oh, I wanted to talk about listening. I didn't have to focus on wasting my brain power. I could still stay present with you, but to be respectful of your time and your energy and what you're giving me. I think listening is one of the weakest links in our society and what we teach our children. Like I used to talk to my kids all the time. They'd be like on the edge of wanting to respond when I'm trying to talk to them. And I'd say to them, did you actually hear what Dad said? And now, how do we present that too? We, as a society, need to learn that we can present our ideals in a respectful, be kind, gratefulness attitude about being able to even share what we stand for. But so many people do it in a violent way. They do it in an angry way. And we need to, as a society, listen, be present, because that person is giving you their time. You might never see them again. And I want to back it up a bit. You talked about people, coming into a room and turning, and you can feel their energy. I kind of call that the smile factor. When I see people, and do they make me smile? Do I feel glad? Do I have that warm fuzzy? Maybe there's somebody I've known for a long time. They need to make me feel that way more times than not. Otherwise, we're in the wrong sphere. They should be somewhere else, and I should be continuing, as you said, gravitating to the positive people, to the people that I need to be, not looking to get rid of the negative. That'll fall off on its own the more I surround myself with positivity. So I like that you brought that up as well. What a fantastic conversation, right? I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah, I think also, and I've learned this for myself, whenever I get defensive, whenever my response is to get angry or defensive, it's typically because I'm centering myself in someone else's story, right? So what I mean by that is, if somebody starts telling them about how someone else harmed them, and I immediately can sense that there's a correlation between my own action in somebody else's life, like I might have done that in my past, there's a tendency for me to get defensive, right? And to, instead of and recognizing that this person's story has nothing to do with me, right? It's their lived experience, and I don't have a right to have an opinion about their lived experience, right? I can share my own lived experience, but I don't get to tell someone that their lived experience is wrong. I should not be centering myself in their story. Instead, when I feel defensiveness coming up now, my practice is to take a breath and say, what is there in this moment for me to learn? How can I get curious, right? How can I understand the nuance in their story? How can I, how can I learn something so that maybe in the future I can be less harmful to other people, right? Because at any given moment in any of our lives, we are the hero to one person and we are the monster to another. And it might be the same action, right? The same action is the hero to one person's story and the monster in another, right? And I think when we as human beings kind of get to a great place is when we can recognize that everything we do has a consequence. Everything we do. It's when we take ownership of those consequences and when we're willing to be held accountable for those consequences, no matter what they are, that we are truly being present and being a good human, right? Because we are human. There's no way for us to be perfect, and perfect can't even be a goal because perfect isn't real. But what we can be is accountable. What we can be is continuously learning. What we can be is invested in being in community together and recognizing how we can show up better for ourselves and one another and be more authentically ourselves, right?
And people just need to understand that life is a journey that is ongoing.
Yeah,
You need to train your mind to always be on the climb. You mentioned the fact of being triggered by somebody else's story and placing ourselves within that story. That happens to me because of my own trauma throughout my
right.
life, and it
Exactly.
happens to my kids. And at the end of the day, those listening, we're not all of a sudden just fixed.
No,
It
there's no
doesn't,
such
it's
thing.
not, there's no such thing. I'm
No
on
such
a continuous
thing.
climb and journey, and I need to recognize and realize when I've become camped. Maybe it's
Yeah,
because I've placed myself into some situation. Maybe it's not just somebody's story. Maybe it's the world's story. Maybe it's
yeah,
my local community story that I've placed myself in because I see my place in there, and now I'm trying to fix it, change it. Well, I can't do that. I need to continually working on me. And like you said, go into the positive, keep on
yeah,
working on being around the positive. That's why I know myself, especially my loyal listeners, I don't listen to the news. I just don't. I can't change what's happening in different countries. And I have a lot of good friends that are from Ukraine that are transplants here. I have ones that have met that have come since the conflict has started. I can't do anything about it except
yeah,
support those that I can, especially those
yeah,
that are asking me for, positive thoughts, for
yeah,
prayers, or, I can't control myself. So living in that association of the media, because that is an association that people live, that, how many people do you know that, like my parents, for example, the older generations, news in the morning, news at noon,
yeah.
news in the
That's my
afternoon,
mom.
news
Yeah,
before they go
my
to
mom
bed.
starts. Yeah, my
I
mom
can't
starts
I
and ends her
can't
day
do
with news.
that. It is just so
But also,
toxic.
yeah, but also we have to recognize that, especially for us in the United States, most of the news media outlets, like almost all of them, are
Are
owned by like
corrupt.
the same, yes, and they're owned by like the same four companies. Doesn't matter. So some of the same companies own,
Canada's too.
yeah, some of the same companies own more liberal media outlets and more conservative media outlets, and they're owned by the same companies, right? And they're controlling the narrative, right? They're controlling what we're seeing. They're deciding what we see. And that's the beautiful thing. You and
Absolutely.
I were talking a little bit before about TikTok and why I absolutely love TikTok, because the thing about it is that it's a whole bunch of people. There's 150 million Americans on TikTok. um, we are collectively sharing our lived experience. And so we're being able to learn from each other in really beautiful ways and connecting in ways that we wouldn't have been able to if TikTok didn't exist the way that it does. Because it's not like any other social media platform, because somebody can make a comment and we can reply to that comment with a video right there very quickly, like, and we can explain and we can expand on things and we can reply with to someone's video with a video, and we can just have these beautiful conversations and understand each other's lived experiences from very different perspectives, right? Like people all across the world, all across the country, and be able to understand what they're experiencing in that moment and be able to show up for each other, right? And I think that, that's the beautiful way that I'm seeing us come together as community. So when I talk about, you know, what we need to do to continue to support each other and to have a better world is to come together as community, I'm seeing that happen, right? And we just need to keep like double down on that, right? And be able to now, instead of just doing it on TikTok, have it continue to bleed into our real life and be able to make that a practice of listening to each other, understanding our struggles are all coming from the same place, right? Like, regardless of political affiliation, 60% of Americans make less than $40,000 a year. That shouldn't be, right?
I
When
agree.
when the top three wealthiest people in the United States make more than the bottom 50% of people in the United States. Three people make more than 50%. And there's 386 million some odd people in the United States. So three people make more than almost 200 million people.
That
You want to think
disparity
about
is
it,
in our country too.
right? That kind of inequity shouldn't exist. And this is why human beings are the only beings on this planet, in this world, that have to pay to exist. You have to pay for all of the natural resources required to stay alive as a human being other than oxygen, right? You have to pay for housing, you have to pay for water, you have to pay for food. And yet we're systematically denying the amount of resources required to properly access those things, right? And
I
so
100% agree.
when we boil it down to that, it doesn't matter what the rhetoric says. It doesn't matter the left, right. It doesn't matter. We are not taking care of each other as a community. We are not showing up for each other as human beings because we are not being given access, equal access to the things required to stay alive as human beings, period. Right. And
Uh,
that is something that we can solve together as a community and needs to be solved, right? Because back before Reagan, this kind of inequity, right, wasn't really the way that it is right now, right? Corporations were not allowed to make 350 times their lowest wage worker or average wage worker, right? We're seeing that kind of wealth inequity, and there's no explanation for it. People with the kind of wealth who couldn't spend it in 100 lifetimes. We need to be able to make sure that all people have access to clean water, because that's a huge issue in the United States right now. Clean water, a nutritious food, and clean and safe housing, period.
but it's pretty hard when the corporations drive it all. Like
Correct.
I look at the commercialization of breakfast and how
Yeah.
the world has been told that as the most nutritional meal of the day, which is poppycock. It's not true. If you understand nutrition and how the body works, what do people feed themselves for breakfast now because of society? Donuts, heavy laden sugary coffee, pancakes, and I'm not anti-carbs, but the way that the industry is designed, it's around all unhealthy carbs. It's all sugar based, so people get jacked up on all that sugar. It affects their emotional state of mind. It affects their drive to have a great day, and it starts with the corruption of the industry from
Well, because
breakfast.
breakfast used to
Right?
just be like whatever food was left over from the night before.
Yeah,
Like
I know.
traditionally in the past, breakfast was just
Yes.
leftovers from dinner the night
Here's some leftover potatoes. We're gonna fry them up, or let's have a couple eggs and let's have some bacon. So there was some protein, there was some dairy involved. Usually, there was a little bit of carb, not a lot. It was a lot different. But now we get manipulated by a society that is easily manipulated. Unfortunately, I wish I could say that we're not, but we are. And it's driven to make us not eat properly, make us binge watch television. Not that, again, those that do that, go for it, as long as you understand the
Yeah,
entertainment value and
yeah,
it's a small portion of your life, not
yeah,
where it controls
yeah.
your life,
Well,
right?
I think the thing is we have to remember is that so much of the aspects of our life is 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 trying to give us ways to numb our existence, right? Because we as human beings are not supposed to exist this way. We're not supposed to, like,
No.
for for hundreds and thousands of years, for thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of years, human beings did not exist this way. They did not exist in static concrete homes in one place, you know, doing one job every single day over and over again, right? This is a modern thing. This came into existence with the industrial era, right? And which is why I call it the industrialization of human beings. People traveled around, right? I went on hunting parties. They moved around, they existed with nature, right? And we don't exist with nature anymore. Most people don't even like have a daily interaction with nature other than breathing air outside of their house. So, I think in order to keep us satisfied or to get us to ignore the fact that we aren't okay, we have lots and lots of programming available to us, television, all of these things, to distract us from the fact that we are, in fact, not living in very humane ways, right? In ways we're pervasively required to live in ways that cause us to repeat the same day over and over and over again in a very industrialized manner that is inhumane, right? And so when people are watching a lot of television, it's just a response to needing to survive mentally within this this cycle of sameness that's so harmful, right? And, when I read books like Rebel Talent by Francesca Gino and some other these books that talk about, allowing people to have like corporations who are built off of, there's a few, not a ton, but there's a few companies, organizations, restaurants who have built inside of their organization the ability for people to try out new things, to do new things, to truly tap into their creativity, right? And to have this ability to not live the same day over and over again. It really opens up and causes corporations and companies and people to actually enjoy living, right? And enjoy what they're doing for work. And it shows in the profitability of these companies, right? Um, and so I think it's just really important that we recognize that like so much of our reaction and so much of our involvement in our world is just trying to survive. Most people are just trying to survive.
Yeah, but the art of just trying to survive the hamster wheel effect, right? Getting onto that hamster wheel throughout our lives, and like you said, escapism through television. Again, I'm not against television. I'm not against people. I watch TV. I like movies, but
Yeah,
in small doses, I understand
yeah,
that there's so much more I want to accomplish in life. And our world is so focused on government, entertainment, in regards to celebrities and living vicariously through other people's lives. And
yeah,
why don't I have that life? And then what happens, right?
yeah,
Or the government's doing this to me and everything's so reactionary. They don't know how to do anything in their lives that is pushing them forward, that they live a life of quiet desperation on a hamster
yeah.
wheel.
And I think
And
again, I come back to it being about community, though, right?
yeah,
Like if we can recognize that we aren't meant to do this alone, then we can feel empowered to connect. Like I tend to watch more TV when I'm not spending time with friends and other people, right? Like
yeah,
if I have the opportunity or I'm making an effort to schedule time with people, then I'm spending less time in front of the television alone, right? And so I think it's like when we make an effort and we're intentional about how we're spending our time, right? We start to be able to show up better for ourselves and in the world, right? Like we can really create that kind of support around ourselves. And I recommend to anybody who's made it this far into the conversation and is still listening, I highly recommend the book How We Show Up by Mia Birdsong. It's all about creating community, forming community, about what does that look like, about taking actionable steps, right? Because so many of us are like, well, I want community around me, I just don't know how. And that's by design. We're not meant to live in community together because if we did, the world wouldn't exist the way it does. And so I really love that book. I read it probably about 6 months ago, and I'm actually getting ready to read it again because I think anything we want to be good at, we have to practice. And so I love to reread books, especially on Audible, so that I can like remind myself, okay, these are I took these actions when I first read it. Now there's another set of action that I could take, right? I can build on those first actions. And so I highly recommend that for anybody who's looking for like actionable ways to build community around yourself.
that's awesome. One of the things that, because we continue on with this conversation, but unfortunately, time is
Yeah,
finite. It's not infinite. And I wanted to ask you about your company. Could you tell
yeah,
us, you started this approximately 5 years ago, if I was reading
yeah,
correctly.
yeah.
I'll let you pronounce it because honestly, I went
Consonate,
on, pardon?
consonate, consonate.
Yes. So I went out, well, people were listening won't know, but I went and looked it up and I was practicing how to pronounce it. And it was, oh my gosh, it was just like one site said to pronounce it this way, one way said pronounce it that way, because I take what I do with podcasting very
Yeah,
serious. And I wanted to, so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to say, hey, talk about your company. Like,
yeah. No worries. Thank
I
you. Yeah,
really want
it's a
to,
real
I want to
word.
know about it, please. So,
Yeah,
pardon me?
yeah. Consonate is a real word. It just happens to be
Yeah,
one we
it is.
And I when I was deciding to rebrand the business, because I originally founded the company as an interior design firm. And once I realized that what I was really trying to get at, the work I really was doing was much bigger than just interior design. I really wanted the name to reflect what the vision that I saw for what now is known as Consonate could could become and what I wanted it to become and how much space I wanted it to be able to take up in the world. And so consonate means to arrange or blend together skillfully as parts or elements, put together in a harmonious, precisely appropriate or elegant manner, right? And that's what I truly believe that we can do with our lives, is we can create our lives as this beautiful, harmonious, and what's precisely appropriate for us, right? Individually, and then also understand how that fits together collectively, right? And so what I focus on in my work is keynote speaking, facilitating workshops, group coaching. I also do one-on-one coaching. Some companies hire me to do like internal leadership group coaching, or one-on-one with leaders. But also I am partnering with a publishing company now, and it kicks off April 28th. I don't know when this is going out, but people can still reach out about it. Partnering to do an author's launch pad. So we'll be a group of people together writing our books together. And at the end of it, you've got this fully published book that then you can either pay the publishing company to market or you can self-market, right? And it's really beautiful for entrepreneurs, for anybody who is building a public speaking career, to be able to tell your story and talk about what you do and be able to further connect with your audience. So, basically what I'm doing is just looking consistently for ways to connect with people, to teach them how to show up better for themselves and for each other, to be more intentional. There's small, very actionable steps we can take to practice intentionality in really small ways. And it then starts to awaken our brain to other ways that we can be intentional, and it can bleed out into the rest of our lives, right? But anything we want to be good at, we got to start with really baby steps and teach our brain how to notice those baby steps and to how to notice those things and those patterns in and around our world. And then we can start applying them in larger ways. Oftentimes, if we start at the really big, it fails because it's too much, right? And so really my work focuses around how to be an intentional leader, how to be intentional in our lives, how to design our lives, and how to be authentically ourselves. And what the heck does any of that mean?
Well, exactly. And one of the things that I was looking at last night, you talk about all of that stuff really is helping people stay connected to joy. And that's one
Yeah,
of the things you like talking about, right?
yeah,
So
yeah. Or
talk
to
more
get
about
connected
that.
to joy. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. When we're really intentional, we start to notice things like this. And I break it down into a really simple example. For instance, if you were to walk into your home, and every time you walk into your home, perhaps there's this piece of furniture that was passed down from a family relative, or it was left there by a previous relationship, a roommate, a romantic relationship, right? And you've kept it because, maybe it was a family heirloom and you felt like you had to, or you were asked to, or you were kind of required to, or whatever it was, guilted into it. Or a previous relationship, you're like, well, it's always been here. But if every time you walk into your home, you see that piece of furniture, and whether consciously or subconsciously, you're relating it to something negative, right? Because it's a painful breakup, or it's, a piece of furniture you don't actually want, but you feel like you have to keep because it was your great grandmother's and you were asked to, right? When we're doing that, we're not giving ourselves permission to even show up and be authentic in our own home, right? That piece of furniture is not aligned with who we are. It's just not. And if we can't even give ourselves permission to give away, donate, repurpose that piece of furniture, right, in our own home, it's likely that that kind of thinking is showing up in other places in our life. And so it's limiting our connection to joy, even in our own home, right? Our home should feel like a very safe space. It should feel like an authentic reflection of who we are and of every member of our family, if we happen to have, and family could be any number of things. It can be a roommate, it could be actual blood relatives, it could be any number of things, however you choose to define that, right? But it should be a safe space for everyone who lives there, right? And if we aren't even doing that, it's likely that that practice is showing up in other places in our life. We don't feel like we can use our voice in other places. So by simply removing that piece of furniture, we're practicing using our voice and practicing taking up space authentically, right? And so when we start to look at those things within our life, we can start to practice being intentional and start to practice showing up for ourselves. And it starts to bleed into other aspects of our life. But our home is the place where we can safely practice those things, right? And it sounds so
Absolutely.
simple. It sounds really simple, but that's how we make exponential change in our life is by making very small changes, and they start to build up on top of each other, and they create a foundation for a beautiful life.
Oh, absolutely. I like, you're right though. There you can have, I like how you talked about the piece of furniture and it's tied to some emotion from
Yep.
a past relationship or somebody that's left this world. It's an anchor. So
Hmm.
those
Yep.
listening, those anchors are going to always be there. And even if you don't
Powerful.
consciously
Yep.
recognize it as you walk by, your mind does.
Yep. Your body
You're
does. Our
exactly.
bodies do. Our bodies do.
Absolutely.
When I was working, when my work was primarily interior design work, one of the first things I would do is walk through someone's home with them. And I would specifically ask two things: that they did not clean or organize their home before I came. I wanted it to be exactly as it was. And oftentimes they're like, "Oh, I can't do that." And I'm like, "I need, number one, I need to see where the dust bunnies are, because I need to see what areas of your life are not, what areas of your home are not being used, and how we might better use them, and how they might better support you. And then I also need to see the areas in which they're overused, and perhaps there's too many uses in one space. And we need to figure out how to use other space in your home that might be less used to take over some of these extra uses that are happening, too many things happening in one space, right? Like, better distribute the use of space in your home, right? But in so doing, what I started to be able to see very clearly is how people would with their body language avoid areas in their own home, not look at them. They would, avoid, they'd kind of open the door to like show me a room, but they wouldn't go in, and they wouldn't offer for me to go in. Right. And so, like, these are the areas inside of our own. It's very powerful, whether we recognize it or not consciously. If we're avoiding areas inside of our own home, there's a reason. We might need help to be able to address those areas or something. But that's the whole point of all of this, is right, like, getting coaching, whether it be inside of our home or inside of our leadership or inside of relationship. Getting that coaching, getting that support to be able to find better ways to show up for ourselves is like human. It's very human. None of us knows all the things. We need support.
Oh, absolutely. I like that though. You're right though. There is certain areas that I think about in my own home, and there's trauma involved. Maybe something that happened with one of my children, or something not necessarily with me personally, but just an interaction that I recall. And when we recognize, and as you're helping people recognize, well, this room, you won't even invite me in, or you're not going in yourself, you'll open the door. That's directly tied to unpacking what's you've
Yep.
compartmentalized and hidden within your 6 inches between
Yep.
your ears.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. That's exactly what we should do, is help people. I guess it's going to sound cheesy, but see the light and actually
Yeah.
realize that you don't have to live on that
Yeah.
same pattern behavior, or be fearful, or live just, you have a giant home and you live in one little area because all this
Yeah.
other garbage happened over here. So
Yeah.
that's great. I
Yeah.
love the
Yeah.
fact of how you've taken the interior design into life design,
Yeah.
and realize that your purpose was at one point in time interior design, but there's so much more to it than that. So you can
Yeah.
help unpack people and help them develop from their interior of their world that they see externally to their interior.
Yeah.
And that's just amazing.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I tell
you're a
people it's the
blessing.
connection between interior design, and I'm pointing at physical space, and interior design pointing at ourselves. Right.
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
connection.
So sorry, listeners, I was pointing around, so was Shana, and then I was pointing at myself. And those watching,
Yeah.
obviously, you're going to see that.
Yeah.
This has been an amazing conversation,
Yeah.
but it's getting close to the end. So one of the things I always like wrapping up with is, Shana, if you had to give our listeners one last closing message, what would you tell them in regards to giving a heck and never giving up?
Curiosity did not kill the cat. Right. Let's reconnect to curiosity, because wrapped up in curiosity is play, is authenticity, is vulnerability, is the willingness to recognize that we always have more to learn, right? Anytime we stick ourselves in the place of expert, we are we are disconnecting ourselves from the ability to learn and connect to other people, right? And so reconnecting to curiosity is a foundational aspect of getting intentional about our lives.
Yeah, I love that, because really at the end of the day, why do you have to be so curious? I remember hearing that as a kid, right? Not
Yeah,
necessarily from my parents. My
yeah,
parents were supportive in that way, but from other people, like,
yeah,
outside forces, from the school, from educators to
yeah,
extended family. Why do
yeah,
you always ask so many questions? Why are you always
yeah,
so curious? To a point where
yeah,
I got to a point where I didn't ask as many questions, and really questions questions are important, because when
yes,
we stop questioning, then we get stuck into addiction of
yes,
our poor patterns that we've developed
yeah,
from others, and we continue to feed them. And so be curious, people. Ask
yeah,
questions. Ask good questions, because contrary to what people say, I used to say this to my kids, but now I've corrected that. When I have my belief system change, I do tell people, I don't keep on
yeah,
propagating the same brokenness. You know what? You're right. There is bad questions. So before you ask a question, even to yourself, if you're looking in the mirror, think to yourself, is this question going to serve me, or is it going to drag me backwards? Right. So the same thing, if people ask me questions, they'll say, can we ask you a question? I'll say, absolutely. Oh, it might be a stupid question. Well, let it out, and we'll figure it out together whether
yeah.
or not it's a dumb question,
Sometimes,
because
yes,
it's
sometimes
not.
asking, sometimes asking the question awkwardly helps us to get to the place where we can ask the question,
Exactly.
right?
The
So
good
like
question.
in that way there's no bad questions, but we have to be willing to like play in the nuance of that, right? And we have to be willing to perhaps sit with it and ask the question to ourselves, or maybe asking a close group of friends before we're asking the world, right, a
Yeah.
question, right? And sometimes it's effective just to Google it, because a lot of times, you know, people ask me questions, and especially like professionally, people come to me and ask me questions. And I'm like, I really wish you had taken a few moments to Google this, right? Instead of taking my time when this could have very easily been answered by Google, right? And so
I
we
love that. I tell
need to
people that too.
have, yeah, we need to have. I
Google's
think
your
it's
friend.
yeah, I think it's a matter of good faith questions, right? Not putting our
Yeah,
questions, not making our questions someone else's labor, right? And expecting their labor in answering that, right? We can ask questions, but that doesn't mean someone owes us a response. And I think that's the key to remember, is that yes, we can ask the question, but they don't owe us anything. And if they don't answer us, they don't deserve our anger, right?
exactly. I love
And
that. Yeah, they
curiosity,
don't
like
deserve
there's
our
no,
anger.
yeah, leaning into curiosity doesn't necessarily give us the right to be owed anything, right? That's not what curiosity is about.
And see, I used to have this pattern when I was younger, and then even into adulthood, and being that single parent of my kids full time. We talk about, they'd ask a question and I'd automatically answer it, when in reality, there was times where I should have said, that's a great, and I
Yeah,
do this
it's a great
now. I've
question.
taught them this. That's a great question. You know,
Yeah,
how about you do this and that? And then
yeah.
once you've
Explore,
yeah,
explore.
explore, and then come back and we'll have a conversation about
Yes,
that question.
yes,
And we'll
yeah,
come to
yeah,
a moment where maybe I can help you better understand it. Or you'll come to me and say, hey, Dad, I
yeah,
figured it out. We don't
yeah,
need to discuss it. But
yeah.
sometimes when they do that to me, I go, well, that's awesome. Can you tell me what you found out? Because I'd like
Right.
to know.
Yeah. I mean, that's
My
yeah, yeah,
curiosity is
right.
piqued.
Has peaked. Yeah. And I think that's the other thing, is like it's like step one, curiosity. Step two is explorer. Step three is being able to be intentional, right? But
Yeah.
we've got to like start out with curiosity. So yeah, that's the kind of three steps. There's a lot of steps.
Oh, of course
But
there
like
is.
three
Yeah.
basic steps to getting, being able to design our lives, having a well-designed life.
I tell you, anybody listening, you reach out to Shana, you were in for a treat, because there's so much more to unpack for what she knows and how she can help you, just from the little bit of time I spent last night, which may not seem like a lot, but 30 minutes of delving
Yeah.
into what I
Yeah.
could, which is a scratch in the surface.
Yeah.
You're doing some great things for humankind, and I want to
Thank you.
say I appreciate you. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Our time is almost up. I want
Yep.
to respect our listeners and your time. However, before we end, can you please tell the listeners what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah. Check out my website. It's www.consonate.world. I'm sure it'll be tagged in the show notes. My email, my telephone number, all of that are there. Um, and also like all the connections and links to social media. There's some videos, there's some free information there as well. So definitely go ahead and check out the website. That's the best way to get a hold of me.
Yeah, and they can, when you go to her website, you can add yourself to a mailing list,
Yep.
which
Yeah.
is really nice, right?
Yeah.
So I've been to the site.
You don't have to. Yeah, you don't have
Yeah,
to.
you can hit the escape key.
Mm-hmm.
As a note, you can hit the escape key if you don't want to be part of it. I love
because
it. I always smiled when I seen that.
When I first put it up, I was like, how are people going to know that they don't have to subscribe? It felt like a bully situation, right? And I talk about being intentional. I'm like, what if somebody doesn't want to subscribe and they feel like they have to get past this screen? So I made sure that I put a note in there that says you can subscribe or you can hit escape and you don't have to subscribe. So it's up to you. The choice is yours. I believe in consent. So you can consent to subscribe or not, whichever feels best for you.
I'll tell you this, listeners, when you check out our website, there's intentionality through all of it, but little nuances, but there's very much thoughtfulness too. So I would highly suggest checking it out. So thanks so much. Is there any last closing thing you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate your level of intention. I appreciate the conversation. So thank you. I appreciate it a lot.
Myself included, because we've both invested time now, and I'm coming away feeling super grateful and glad. And I look forward to, maybe in the future, us connecting again and seeing where you're at. So thanks so much for being on Give a Heck, Shana. I appreciate your time and sharing some of your experiences so that others too can learn it is never too late to give a heck.
Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.